I'm Jennifer Byrne, and welcome to this special on the dark places of literature, where the basest of human emotions are played out and the superficial order of our lives can be turned upside down in seconds. We're talking crime fiction, and anyone reading it lately will have detected a certain chill in the air as the success of Stieg Larsson and his Millennium Trilogy has pulled focus to Scandinavian crime. And of course, the gorehounds amongst us will have noticed that things have gotten darker. No suburban home now seems complete without a second guest bedroom, a plunge pool and a soundproofed torture chamber in the basement. We've brought together some of the most vital writers in the field to look at these recent developments in the genre, starting with Mala Nunn, who grew up in Swaziland and whose novels A Beautiful Place to Die and The Silent Valley explore life in 1950s South Africa during apartheid. Michael Rowbotham straddles crime and psychological thriller in his 7 novels, the latest being The Wreckage, for which he owes me 2 nights' sleep, at least. One-time footballer, pop star and author Joe Nesbo, well, he is simply one of the best-selling crime writers in the world. The latest in his series featuring Detective Harry Hole is Phantom, which must be the only crime novel in recent times to feature a sequence written from the point of view of a rodent. We are very pleased to have him here tonight. And finally, Lee Redhead, who from Peep Show to Thrill City has made Stripper by Night, Private Investigator by Day, Simone Hirsch, a driving force, demonstrating another recent trend in crime to rescue female characters from roles as femme fatales or the occupants of body bags. Won't you please welcome them all? Now, let's start with should be a very simple question for you all. What makes a great detective and, of course, a great villain? Come on, that's simple.
I think they're both, in both cases, it's a case that they have to be incredibly believable. They cannot be cardboard characters, sort of stereotypes of all good or all evil. They have to be very nuanced characters, and they have to have flaws. Not flaws that make them hopeless and irredeemable, where they irritate you as a reader, but the sort of flaw where you feel for their pain and you want to take the journey with them.
I think that all stories about heroes, it's not stories about whether they are going to solve the case or whether they are going to survive physically, but it's whether their eternal soul will be saved. Will they do the right thing? I think that all really good stories are about moral choices, and what we are really concerned is whether our hero is going to make the right moral choice.
That's a really interesting evolution of the genre, isn't it? Because it did used to be all about solving crime. I mean, do you see it like yours is Emmanuel Cooper? I mean, do you see the same, that it's...
Look, I actually think it's fundamental that most detectives now are in some form of peril because we understand the psychological field they operate in. But I also think it's equally important that they actually do let us in on what's happened and how things have worked out. Now, the old-fashioned way of saying that they sort of do have to solve cases. For me, from my perspective, I don't want to be left not knowing who's done what.
But then again, you also said, like Michael said, an interesting hero has to have flaws.
Absolutely.
So sometimes he or she has to do the wrong moral choice.
That's what I really love about contemporary crime fiction is that there are so many more flawed heroes now. I think in the past there were a lot of superheroes and people that were just very good and very right all the time. And I find it really interesting that people's personal flaws get in the way.
And also the people who write it are not necessarily the classic author. I mean, like Simone, your heroine, Simone Kirsch, you made her very like you, didn't she?
Yeah, well, she's usually the stripper in crime novels is on the autopsy table being cut up, or, she's the stripper with a heart of gold. She's never usually the hero of the piece. So that's what I really wanted to do because I couldn't find anything where the stripper was the hero.
Yeah.
So, and she's very flawed, and I think in the past, I think it's this feminist crime fiction of like the 70s and 80s. You had great kick-ass female heroines, but they were just a bit too good. They didn't have enough flaws. They were just a bit too kind of perfect politically and in every way.
Well, they were a product of 70s feminism.
Yeah.
And, you had to be all these things.
But it's also that there is still a very popular part of the genre that does have this James Bond, Jack Reacher, Jason Bourne type hero who can outrun, outfight, defeat the forces of evil single-handedly, which is, fantasy type stuff, but it's still, straight escapism. They do work as products. But I think a lot of other contemporary crime writers are doing something that's far grittier than that and trying to create flawed characters who do make the wrong moral choice occasionally, and it tortures them.
I've got to say that every time I read Dennis Lehane, I can almost not stand it. Why? Because of the moral choices.
I love
that's the reason. I'm so in flux because I think, and then I get confused, which I love, which is where you think, no, you should definitely just take that kid and run. No, you shouldn't, and then when the choice is finally made, it's often the good choice, but it's actually the bad choice at the same time. And I find that quite confronting when I read his stuff.
I think that the crime novel is more or less taken over for the religious novel that dealt with the moral questions. Seems like the so-called serious literature aren't interested in dealing with that in a normative way. But crime novels does, and it does ask question what is right and what is wrong. Yeah. Back in the 70s, when Sjöwall and Bale, the godfathers of Scandinavian crime, started writing their very left-wing political novels.
This is the Mountain Beck series.
Yes.
Yes.
And after that, the crime writers were sort of given the mandate to analyze and criticize society. They are given that mandate that previously was the priest and the religious people that would write books about that.
What other ways do you think that crime has changed in the last 15 years? There's the complexity. What else?
I actually think just structurally, they tend to do more multi-viewpoint than before. So just the structure often has changed. I'm not sure if that's the influence of television, but the chapters tend to be a bit shorter. And then you do the structures actually spread over a variety of different characters. And those characters, you can actually have the voice of the killer. You can have the voice of the detective, the voice of the girl who's gone missing or the boy who's gone missing. So I think that way they've actually spread it it's quite diverse that way, just within the story, that you have all these different viewpoints cut up. Before you were pretty much following one guy.
Would you agree with that? Multiple voices?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. You are seeing, and people are playing around with the tenses as well in terms of, present tense or first-person point of view and putting third-person point of view in the same story. And they're doing things like that, which is quite a modern phenomenon. And the other thing is the sheer, the pacing of modern novels.
So fast.
They are so fast. And not
but they're so long, a lot of them, too.
Yeah, and it's
Lehane's last was about that thick.
And
yours,
some of
too.
But it's one of those things, I think, and I know when you talk about the last 10 or 15 years, but if you go back to P.D. James and when she was, writing at the absolute peak of her powers, you often wouldn't have a murder until 200 pages into the book, and I just don't think you could get away with that now in most modern crime novels if you just spent 200 pages introducing all the characters before you discovered who actually died.
It's interesting that you guys are saying that, because even Sue Grafton, who writes PI novels that are traditionally done in the first person, I've noticed her last few books, she's doing a lot of third person and different character points of view and that sort of thing. So that's becoming quite prevalent now.
And I think it's interesting that Mala mentioned TV series, because I think that TV series and movies have influenced novels a lot. That probably my generation or our generation of writers, although we probably have been book readers since we were young, we have probably seen more movies than we have read books. And so we are so influenced by it. And it's also interesting that you say TV series, because I think that probably where you find the most interesting storytelling right now is in American TV series. And I think that what we're seeing now is that crime novels are being influenced by it. I think Milan Kundera, the writer, once said that the novel can exist just as long as the novel does what only the novel can do. I don't think that's true. I think that what we see now is that if you see in Hollywood, you see most of the best-selling movies, they are based on novels. And you see novels looking more and more like movies and TV series. So I think it's all about storytelling. I think the medium is becoming less important, but the story is at the core.
Do you feel that? Because I mean, your books are very tautly. They're very kind of they jump quite a lot too.
Yeah, I think definitely watching movies and television has done that. And I find a lot of books now, you know, in TV you get the teaser at the start. So the first scene is like the teaser, the person who's murdered, and then it sort of goes back. And most novels I read now kind of start with that, and it seems very much almost like a television script.
Yeah, and the sort of climactic events now, I would say, with a TV series, and I do watch quite a lot of the bigger American television series, and absolutely the writing is just phenomenal. And you think people used to look down on crime writers, and they used to look down on television writers, but they don't anymore, because there's something about being at the forefront of the way in which people are receiving stories and information that have made it all very acceptable now. But with the big TV series, I'm just in awe of the multiple storylines they run and the way in which they funnel at the end. But those storylines are often just, you don't know where you stand a lot of the time.
But
which is exactly what's bringing you in.
And it does seem weird in a way we're talking about TV and series, but they are great writers. I mean, in fact, some of them, like Richard Price, they go in and out between writing novels, crime novels, and they are great writers to do that. So it's all part of it.
Crime novels now have a series. It used to be could be one big hook at the beginning of the book. That was often a murder. Now it's like a tuna line.
Though, in fact,
loads of hooks.
In lots of ways, the biggest of all the trends in contemporary crime has been the arrival of the Ice Brigade, Snow Brigade. But as you say, it wasn't just Stieg Larsson. There was a whole, this husband and wife team in the Martin Beck series. I mean, Wallander, absolutely. I mean, Henning Mankell was writing for a long time about Wallander. But it was Stieg Larsson that came along and... Is there a distinctive quality to Scandinavian writing?
It has a quality to it that has to do with quality writing. And I think that has to do with Sjöwall and Waller, like I mentioned, moving the detective novel from the kiosks, being pulp fiction, into the serious bookstores. And what happened was that, of course, that young writers, young talented writers that otherwise would have written other kind of novels, they started writing crime novels. And I think that is what you saw with Henning Mankell and Stieg Larsson and a lot of, especially female Norwegian writers. And there are just so many writers who are good at their job. And also the serious writers, they have almost all of them at one time or another had to go at the crime novel. It's just like something that you do.
For me, coming from the outside, I actually can't separate really my own emotions regarding it, except when I picked up my first Henning Mankell novel. I know it sounds stupid, but I was surprised when there was a Pakistani guy working in the corner store. You know, and then there were all these things that were brought up as social issues in the novel, which I still had this sort of IKEA mindset regarding the Nordic countries. You know, there's enormous...
Don't forget smorgasbord.
Smorgasbords, beautiful blondes dating rock stars, you know, it was clean snow. And suddenly there were these books that were sort of taking me somewhere else that I didn't know existed beneath that. And I actually loved having that happen to me. I loved being taken out of what was my own kind of naive perception of Scandinavian countries and just being shown another part of it.
It's interesting people refer to it as Nordic noir, because I think a lot of the books do have that sort of hard-boiled or noir sensibility. I haven't read very many that are sort of Nordic cozies at all. There's a lot of drinking and there's a lot of
cozy crime novels.
They did in the 50s and 60s. Yeah. But I think Sjöwall and Waller put an end to that. I think that I heard an interesting analysis because we always wonder why would a guy living in Bronx in New York find Scandinavian crime stories scary, because they have these things happening on their doorstep. And the answer was that, yeah, but as readers are intelligent, they will put things into context, meaning that if a woman or two women are found killed in a village in the northern parts of Sweden or Norway, they can see that this is shocking. That this is something else than having somebody shot in the neighborhood.
The sort of human dimension is really clear.
I mean, I thought I was in South Africa last year, and there were 72 policemen had been murdered in Johannesburg since the start of the year. And I kept thinking, well, why are South Africans so interested in reading crime novels? They have to pick up the newspaper and it's all there, you know. But it was astonishing how they are huge crime readers there. And it is because they've got to find something that touches a chord.
Do you read much Scandinavian crime?
Yeah, I've read a fair bit.
And how would you characterise it? What the character of it is?
I think it is very realistic, very gritty, and very, very sort of hard-boiled and noir.
Why do we like that? Why do we want to read that?
I don't know. I think it's becoming more popular. I think people are sort of over the cozies and that kind of thing, and people want more realistic depictions of violence because, I don't know, I think people get a bit of a thrill out of it, personally. And I think that sort of death is the last taboo. Sex is everywhere. I mean, sex is like 9 a.m. on video hits with the little school children watching it. You can see everything. You see more on the telly than you would see in a strip club these days. But death is the sort of final frontier. That's what you're really shielded from, and I think people are really fascinated by that. So people
really
read,
frightened of.
Yeah. So people read more violent, explicit crime because the violence is really explicit, I think, now.
It is an interesting paradox, I think, that particularly given that most societies are richer, most societies, Western societies, are actually, if you look at the figures, less violent. But the books, the crime books, are dark and getting darker. That's another, I would suggest, big trend of recent crime. Would you agree? And if so, why?
Oh, I think with some, and I don't like these books when I read them. Some writers try to hide their shortcomings as writers by just making the books as violent and as dark as possible.
You sounded like Mary Whitehouse then.
I know. If a book opens with, you know, I can't think of there's one I read recently. I read the opening page, and it was about a priest whose head gets cut off and a dog's head is sewn on in its place. And I'm thinking, I'm just not going to read this. You know, I'm just not. I'm done here. You know, I think. So there is an element of that. It is.
Do you agree? It is getting dark.
I think
it's a dark world.
Yeah, I think it. Well, I don't know. The world's definitely not getting darker.
The dark world of modern
definitely,
crime.
I'd say it is.
Then again, if you look at the stuff that Jim Thompson wrote in the 50s and the 60s, which was, you know, more or less. I mean, he wrote Bret Easton Ellis' American Psycho in the 50s and 60s, and you saw one of his great novels, The Killer Inside Me, was made into a movie, and people would, and it wasn't. The movie was, you know, sort of soft compared to the book, even though people and people would walk out of the theater because it was too violent, you know, and too dark. So I'm not so sure if it's that much darker now.
But then again, you got pinged for, I think, for sensationalising violence, didn't you, recently with the leopard? So you could be being defensive. Do you think you did?
I did.
You did sensationalise.
It was a book where I was balancing on the edge, and I wasn't so sure whether I was going too far. But I know that in at least 2 of the scenes that I think they referred to, I went too far. And if I were to rewrite
How is too far? What is the line of too far?
It is
okay, too far.
That you're staying. It's like massaging people, and you're staying at where it really hurts for too long, and it's not making you feel in long term. It's not healthy. You're not getting better. You're getting worse. So and when I wrote it, I sort of felt polluted, and I think to a certain extent I polluted my readers too in those two scenes.
I know that makes me really want to read it now.
So I regret that. I really regret that.
But if someone hadn't picked you up, would you have known? Did you know from your...
Yeah, I knew.
There's an agreement you almost have when you go and I know with Shatter, with the book I wrote, was an incredibly dark book, but the reader trusted my hero, to take them into this, and the author, that I could take them to a very dark place, but I would lead them out without traumatising them, and I wouldn't leave them traumatised. So there is a point where you can potentially traumatise your reader by staying too long.
But I think you can actually choose your poison now very much. And I
take it that you don't choose much. I mean, you told me that you wouldn't even read American Psycho. And that wasn't very realistic, that one.
No, you know, I come from a place where people genuinely do kill each other. And they really do torture each other.
I'm not coming to your house.
Murder each other. No, not here, thank the Lord, Michael. But I come from a very violent place, and it disturbs me sometimes when and this is sometimes the skill of the author. Some authors can take me somewhere really dark and I don't mind. And other authors take me there and they're basically kind of, there's a sort of a sensational element to it. And even
but
when
of course that's sensational.
Of course, that's the love, isn't it? That's the joy you can get from it. But for me, there's certain authors I just don't, I'm sorry, I don't want to know. Don't want to go there.
Let me be quite specific, because women, this has also reared its head in the last 5 or 10 years. The fact that most of the victims are women, also a lot of the writers are women, which sort of somewhat seemed to forestall the complaints for a while. But I mean, I'm sure you know, there was a critic a few years ago who just said, I'm not going to review these. He said, she said that graphic sadistic misogyny was disfiguring the crime fiction genre and wouldn't do it anymore. Would you agree with that? I think that
Tess Gerritsen, the American crime writer, said in Melbourne quite recently, I did a panel with her, and she said that all her victims are women because most of her readers are women, and the few times that she's had a male victim, the feedback from readers is that they don't find that anywhere near as interesting. They want to imagine almost themselves and what they would do in these situations, and that's why she said in all her books, her victims will always be women.
I think you can't discount the fact that while we feel that we are terribly advanced, there's probably just a hard-beating genetic core that says, women in trouble. But I think that there's that primal thing where a woman might actually give you a more primal feeling. That's actually not...
You get more scared for the female victim than from the male victim.
I haven't researched that more, and I haven't found I have a preference for male or female victims at all. I generally am reading for the detective.
Well, when it comes to too far, I think, Michael, you should give us... You actually have done a road test on this.
I did. Peter Temple and I were interviewed at one point and asked that question, and Peter said that we could boil a baby and eat it with truffles and that would be fine, but hell would descend should you harm a family pet. And Peter, as you know, writes beautifully about dogs and the broken shore, and he has lots of dogs. And I decided in Bleed for me that there's a terrible scene where a dog is tortured and killed, a beloved Labrador. Oh, the emails. I had friends ringing me in tears saying that they wouldn't read the book again. Some brought their dog in from outside and slept with the dog for 3 days. They were so traumatised by it. And this is a book about, young girls being groomed and all sorts of terrible things happening, but that didn't bother them. It was the fact that the dog got hurt.
You said once, Joe, that there are only 2 stories worth writing about, and that's love and murder. And there's a bit of love in some of your books, but it's not the primary thing. It's primary murder. Do you ever just get sick of it, given that probably the dominant tone of contemporary fiction in crime is weary acceptance? You can solve this crime, rescue this person, but in the end you're not going to change the system. Would you agree that's sort of the mood of contemporary fiction? Yes. Weary acceptance. Do you ever just get sick of it and think, oh, I wish I'd done love instead?
Write a romance.
I think basically, I think I do write about love. There's a scene in one of my books, The Devil's Star. It's about a guy who he takes a girl with him home. It's a one-night stand. They're making love in his waterbed, and when they are making love, she can feel something hitting her between the shoulder blades that's in the bed. And so after they had sex, he will walk off and have a shower, and she will take the sheets off the bed, and she will see the profile of a naked woman inside the bed. And as she is looking at this dead woman, she realizes the shower have stopped, and she can hear the water drops falling on the wooden floor at the behind her. And this woman inside the bed is then, of course, a woman who the man has, his former girlfriend. She wanted to leave him, so he killed her. And he put alcohol in the bed instead of water. So he has her there, preserved, forever young, forever naked, and ready for him when he comes home. And to me, that's a love story.
You are one sick puppy.
Very sick. For the others, okay, so at the end of your working day, and you've either basically preserved some corpse in alcohol, how do you get back to normal life? What are you having for dinner? Omelette?
But I'm telling you, if you have a waterbed in your apartment,
I have. Of course, that's where it comes from. I got rid of my bed, by the way.
All right, okay, so we can
So how
probably
do you
go for
come
a
back
drink
to normality?
after. That's fine.
I mean, after...
Do you want to get back to normality? I mean, it's our job.
It is, although I think when I
things.
wrote, because I write first person, and when I write from the point of view of the villain, first person, it is a bit like, you have to get into character in a sense. And I know when I wrote some of the scenes in Shatter, that I would come upstairs and have about 2 showers and almost be shaking when I lay in bed, because it's about someone that manipulates people and, by convincing them that their children have been kidnapped. And I felt, I was really, I almost traumatised myself in the writing of that. And I hated writing those scenes. Didn't mind writing scenes from the point of view of the hero, but...
So it does affect you?
Yeah, I found that very disturbing.
I think it's amazing when you're writing, and so you're writing a violent scene or a sex scene, and you actually feel like you're there and it's happening, and it does take a while to come down from that. Your pulse rate goes up, you can start sweating, like you feel like you're actually there. It's a virtual reality.
This all sounds so delicious to me, because so much of the time I'm in the middle of something and I have to stop. Okay, I don't care whose turn it was to do that. I've got 2 children, Jennifer, and they're a very small house. And I want to be in my temple, believe me. I want to be able to come out of my office and go, God, I can barely react to real life. But my children are too small for me to do that. So therefore, I must seal myself away. And then occasionally they'll come into my office and look over my shoulder and go, oh my God, what are you writing about? Because there's no boundaries in my house.
Well, look, that is our show for tonight. Won't you join me in giving a big thank you to tonight's guests, to Marla, to Michael, to Joe, and to the Lee Redhead. Please join us again for the First Tuesday Book Club on the 1st of June. Until then, think nice thoughts and very happy reading. Good night.